All right. So, welcome to the next Students of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast. I'm Mike, joined alongside
Vincent.
the president of this wonderful establishment and the often mentioned man in the comments. And this is almost spurned out of a long-standing joke that we're actually going to do this. We are going to be talking about the first 4 issues of Jim Lee's WildCATs today.
Yep. So these are what we're basing off of is Mike here has the trade paperback of those first 4 issues
that I bought for $1.
Yeah, that's a pretty good deal. I also had this trade paperback at home. So for this video, I reread the issues online separately. So there's a few things we can talk about there and the difference. Also, it's worth noting that originally this trade, when it was released at the price point of $9.95, it came polybagged with a special 0 issue, and you might have been able to like get it separately, and I'm sure it was in package and stuff, but I believe this was the standard way that they released the 0 issue, and I'll briefly get into that probably towards the end, but Mike didn't read that, and it's not super important.
So stick around here in a couple seconds. You'll be graced with the wonderful WildCATs cartoon theme. And in a few seconds, we'll be diving in and discussing the first 4 issues of WildCATs.
So Jim Lee launched WildCATs in 1992. This was his launch title as part of the Image launch after he and I believe 6 others, maybe 5 others, I'm not going to count them right now, left Marvel to form Image Comics. And so since I read the single issues, all of them include like a little introduction from Jim Lee in the beginning of the issue, which none of that's in the trade.
Nope.
And so real quickly, before we get into that, some quick background on Jim Lee. So Jim Lee...
If you haven't heard of Jim Lee.
Yeah. So Jim Lee went to high school, he went to college, and he was preparing to go into medicine. And he abandoned a future career in medicine to do comic books. And the artist...
So it worked out pretty well for him?
More or less, yeah. The artist credited with really shepherding him into the industry was Rick Burchett, who many may know from Batman Adventures and other nice comics. And in the beginning of his career, both Marvel and Malibu offered him work. Those were the only companies that gave him a shot. And he ultimately went with Marvel since he was a fan of those characters as a kid. And so he worked on Alpha Flight for a while, and then Punisher War Journal. And then he became iconic through his work on X-Men with Chris Claremont. I mentioned Marvel and Malibu were the 2 companies to offer him jobs, and that's interesting because for about a full year, Malibu actually published Image's comics or distributed them before Image became financially secure and was able to do all the business up and down themselves. And WildCATs here is co-written by Brandon Choi, who grew up with Jim Lee. Like, they knew each other from when they were like in 5th grade or something like that. And similar to Lee, Choi left a very lucrative career in law. And Brandon Choi is not quite the all-star name.
Yeah, I've never heard of Brandon Choi.
That Jim Lee is. And that's because Brandon Choi worked almost exclusively with Jim Lee, or at least within the Wildstorm sphere. So he worked on WildCATs for a long time. He worked on Gen 13, Wetworks, Deathblow, and really the only thing outside of Wildstorm is he worked with Jim Lee on the Fantastic Four Heroes Reborn reboot.
So we're talking about Jim Lee. Can you remember what your first Jim Lee comic was? Because I know what mine is.
I don't really know. Like, I think
if you like had to remember, like, what was the first Jim Lee thing you read, or like first Jim Lee art you remember seeing?
I mean, it was definitely X-Men. It's not like it was anything Wildstorm or even his DC work, which I guess would have been around my time. But it was kind of more just like I was reading X-Men stuff growing up, and then I like discovered Jim Lee going back.
Okay, so for me, my first Jim Lee thing is it might actually have been Batman: Rise of Sin Tzu, that video game, because he designed Sin Tzu,
Okay.
the villain. But the first Jim Lee comic I read was Batman Hush.
Yeah.
And then obviously I've like gone back. I've seen his work on X-Men, but haven't read it yet. But like,
yeah,
I'm a big Jim Lee fan.
I mean, Jim Lee, I think all of the image artists, they've kind of gone through evolutions or lack thereof, depending on who you're talking about, and they have different eras and stuff like that. And I think Jim Lee is one of the image founders where you can always tell that it's Jim Lee, but he has different eras.
Yeah.
And so this in 1992, WildCats to me looks it's mostly indistinguishable from his X-Men work.
Yeah, I was going to say this looks a lot like his X-Men stuff.
Yeah, this is not at all like his Superman and Batman stuff, which
doesn't look like his Justice League stuff yet.
Yeah, granted, even Hush, that's not until I think about 10 years after this.
Yeah.
So it looks a lot like X-Men. He has this very detailed style. Like I think Hush and For Tomorrow. Like I don't know if you agree with this, but I think his work had like a sheen on it or something. If that makes sense. Like
there's a shine to it.
Yeah, he got a little like smoother. And this
it definitely got smoother by the time you got to Batman. Yeah.
Yeah, and WildCats and like his late X-Men work, you have this hyper detailed thing.
But it also looks very rough.
Yeah, you'll see. There's a few
particularly in faces.
Yeah, there's a few close-ups on faces where there's all kinds of
there's lines.
You'd think they're wrinkles and stuff, but they're just like lines on their face for detail and like all kinds of cross-hatching and stuff like that.
I guess my biggest question is Scott Williams is pretty much, when I read a Jim Lee book where Jim Lee's drawing it, Scott Williams is always anchor. Has he always been Jim's anchor, or is this the first time he's worked with him? Because he's basically worked with him forever at this point.
Honestly, I'm not confident to totally answer that, but I'm pretty sure Scott Williams worked on X-Men alongside him. But I don't think I'm not sure because actually in one of the intros, Jim Lee actually talks about how for a while Will Portaccio was actually inking him on some of his early Marvel work, and Portaccio would be one of the other Image founders and the one that probably worked with Jim Lee the closest throughout the early days of Image. And of course, the Portaccio parallel is pretty interesting because they worked closely at Wildstorm, and then also the two of them both got their major breakouts at Marvel on Punisher titles, and then both worked on X-Men around the same time on the different titles and kind of intersected each other's runs.
And going with that, you mentioned Jim Lee has 3 distinct different eras, and I think we should break that down pretty quickly, like 90s X-Men era Jim Lee, and like Wildstorm and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like that mid 2000s era with Batman and Superman, which I think for me that's my favorite, just because I prefer just a little bit more smoother. I'm a really big fan of his Batman.
Yeah.
I think Hush is maybe not been the best story, but man, that's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
There's Jim Lee now, which is.
He did Justice League for about a dozen issues or so
give or take
in 2011 with Jeff Johns in the New 52. I'm not a fan of that. Some of that is his design work, which we'll probably get into that a little bit. Like I think some of his X-Men designs are super iconic. Some of these Wildcats designs are awesome, and we'll get into one or two of them. But also,
I like them.
He falls into a lot of tropes, and a few of the characters don't stand up super well. And you can even go back to that with some of the X-Men stuff. Like you can totally nitpick some like a design like Psylocke and compare that to some of the characters in this book.
He literally draws 2 Psylocks in this book.
And then I think his design stuff on Justice League, like the way he redesigned Cyborg and Darkseid, I'm not a fan at all. And obviously he has the infamous collars on all the New 52 redesigns. And then he pretty much does a similar thing. He did a run on Suicide Squad recently, which is.
Can you even call that a run?
I mean, it was about a year.
Okay, I didn't even know if he made it around that far.
And it was just weird because it's a double shipping book, so he only drew like 3/4 of each issue, and there was a backup.
Yeah.
But so technically, he kind of really only did 6 full issues. But that's like his hyper detailed style. But also in recent years, he's also been doing some like a few experimental kind of styles where like he did some Batman Europa, and he tries different things, and I don't know. He's an interesting artist. But I would agree. I mean, I'm super nostalgic, kind of retroactively. I wasn't really alive when he was actually doing it in the first place. But I'm nostalgic for his X-Men, but I think for me, the peak of his art is, ironically, All-Star Batman and Robin. I think that was the peak.
It's really, really good. Like, I haven't read All-Star Batman and Robin yet, but, like, I've seen, like, that's a beautiful-looking book.
Yeah. I mean, you don't necessarily need to read it. Just flip through
it. He might be the best artist to have ever drawn the original Dick Grayson costume. Because he makes that thing look really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something people say. So let's jump right into WildCATs. Let's talk
covert action teams.
Yeah, so WildCATs is covert action teams, and like the way they explain like what WildCATs means, like I think it kind of contradicts itself, because at one point it seems like
if you're covert, I don't know how you're action.
Because at one point, like some like government agent person like kind of alludes to the fact that there are tons of WildCATs, and like a few other characters are occasionally called WildCATs in the book, I think. But WildCATs also specifically refers to this team.
The way I read it, I think they like those two like government guys at the beginning. I think they refer to them as cats.
Well, yeah.
But these are the WildCATs.
Yeah, which they're the WildCATs because wild means like they're rogue or something like that. But also like it doesn't really imply that these like used to be government agents. It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Well, that's making a ton of sense. This book makes no sense.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on.
Well, we'll get into some more of that. I want to real quick call out a few. So Jim Lee's coming off of X-Men at this point, and a lot of the image creators like they were kind of replicating or imitating some of their Marvel work initially. Like Todd McFarlane's Spawn is very, very reminiscent of Spider-Man with the chains and everything like that.
I mean, the face is just Spider-Man, but like different.
And so we're gonna draw a few of the X-Men parallels here. Like first of all, this team has a like stealth jet that they have.
Yeah.
And it's called the Merv, and it's literally the Blackbird basically.
It's the Blackbird.
They also have a combat training room.
It's the Danger Room.
Which is literally the Danger Room. And then you want to run down the characters real quick?
Hopefully I can remember them all. I'm gonna try to pick them off from here because I'm trying to remember names. So there's Spartan, and he's kind of like their leader.
Yeah,
he's like a cyborg dude.
Yeah, Spartan's like a cyborg cybernetic thing. I think he's pretty much the Cyclops character, where he's like the field leader, and he's like kind of uptight, sort of.
I should say that no one in this book has a character. Well, they're all archetypes.
Yeah, pretty much. All right.
There's Maul, who's like the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, Maul is a Hulk analog. He can manipulate his size. He can't shrink or anything, but he can get larger and then go back to normal. But it's inversely linked to his intelligence. So if he gets too big, he gets out of control. I mean, it's pretty much like the Hulk.
Yeah. What is his name? Psyblade. Warblade.
So Warblade, he's
kind of like I got like what? He's like Shatterstar.
What I was thinking is like, because he kind of has like claws things, so he's like Wolverine, but he can also stretch.
Okay.
And also like I think, but personality-wise, I think he's kind of like a Human Torch or Iceman kind of character, where he's like really full of himself and he's taunting.
Well, that's the thing. You've read more WildCATs than I have. I've only read 4 issues, so you know these characters more than I would by reading further things.
I mean, in this, he's like taunting Maul, and he's like really cocky and stuff like that. But also visually, I think, and I don't even know if I don't think this character was introduced yet, but he reminds me of Romulus, the Wolverine villain, who has like tons of like really long claws.
Yeah.
And Romulus, I think he even has like this weird ponytail thing sometimes.
Yeah, he does. Is it? I forget her name.
It's
Psylocke, but
that's Zealot.
Yeah, she's the first Psylocke. There's 2 Psylocks on this team.
Yeah, one of the lines in the book, like the caption refers to Zealot as sex and violence all rolled together with a bad attitude, which is kind of descriptive.
What's really funny is she looks like Jim Lee's design for she's on Suicide Squad. What's her name? Katana.
Okay.
She has like the same kind of katana, like facial, like the same like focusing on her mask or on her.
Yeah. So Zealot is like this like member of this like female ninja assassin clan called the Coda. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
She has a sword, and then she also had this other blade weapon.
She knows Grifter really well.
Yeah. Her and Grifter refer to each other as like brother and sister. And she also has like this boomerang looking thing, but it's never clear within this book whether she throws it or hits people with it. Like they never show her use it. You just see it in her hands. And so let's move on to Grifter, which I think
Grifter is the coolest.
Yeah, Grifter
because he's cool.
Easily the most iconic WildCATs character. He had his own solo title in the New 52 for like 16 issues.
That no one read.
Yeah. And he has this iconic mask, which doesn't really make a ton of sense.
It makes no sense function-wise.
Yeah, and he pretty much has guns. I think we looked into it earlier. He has like psionic abilities,
Here's the thing.
He doesn't use them here at all.
From what I've seen, is everyone wanted their own version of Deadpool when it's right down to the eyes and mask.
Yeah.
On this team, there's two of them because doesn't Warblade have a mask that comes over and then also makes him look like Deadpool?
I think sort of.
And then on Youngblood, when we get to the Youngblood guys, there's also a guy that looks like Deadpool.
We'll get into plenty of Deadpool stuff. And then to round it out, well, not quite.
Because I can't remember her name at all.
Well,
there's the Void too. We forgot the Void and Jacob Marlowe.
So Void and Jake Marlowe, aka Lord Emp, they're not on the cover. We're just looking at the cover of the trade. So Lord Emp is their actual leader, and he's like a.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah, he has like electric powers, sort of, and he doesn't really use them, and he's a dwarf, which
every time Jim Lee draws him, it looks hilarious.
Yeah,
because the proportions don't make any sense.
Yeah, he's drawn very stocky. But there's like one panel where he's standing next to Zealot, and I think it's actually, and there's like no background or anything, which is frequently a thing in this book, but
it's really funny.
But I think I like that panel because it just shows like the different scale. Because Zealot's also, like this Amazonian thing.
The other girl is named Voodoo.
Yeah. But so Lord Emp has like this mysterious background, and they don't really get into it. And he has electric powers, but he doesn't really use them. And in the beginning of the story,
he's kind of like a Nick Fury.
Yeah, in the beginning of the story, we're shown that he was homeless like 2 years ago, and now he's like a multi-billionaire for a corporation, and we don't really know what his corporation even does.
I believe they refer to him as a zillionaire.
Yeah. And Lord Emp, Jacob Marlowe, he also hangs out with Void, who Void is literally like a chick in like a skin-tight bodysuit that's like silver, and she teleports them around and has other kind of psionic abilities, and she, like, within this trade, it just seems like she's some weird like alien thing or hooked into the backstory and stuff, but part of going into the Zero issue real quickly, the Zero issue explains that in her past life, she was a Russian astronaut.
Okay.
And like one of these orb things like crashed into their space station, and then she turned into this thing. It's kind of weird.
Okay, whatever. And
then Voodoo rounding out the rest of the team, and this is where we'll probably move into the plot. Voodoo is literally
a stripper.
And she basically has like, I guess they're also...
By the way, she's the second of the two Psylocks that are on this team.
Yeah. I guess she's also kind of like psionic abilities because she can...
she can see demons.
Yeah, she can see the parasites and then like exorcise them.
Which is weird because flashing back to the New 52 premise of Grifter's series, the entire premise of that book was that he could see the demons.
Yeah.
So that's weird, but... I didn't read that book.
And so the funny thing about Voodoo is like it's not even like a name she chooses or gets given to her, because this is also in the Zero issue. So you see like 2 pages backstory in the strip club, which is where they find her, and she's dressed up in her costume, which continues to be her superhero costume, and one of the other strippers is like I was gonna wear the Voodoo outfit tonight. So her name Voodoo is like literally, it's not even like
it's her stage name.
No, it's not even her stage name.
That's right. It wouldn't be a stage name.
It's the name of her like outfit that is passed around at the strip club she's from.
I just hope they wash it.
Yeah, it's weird.
Would that be dry clean only?
I don't know. But I mean, I think like at least most of their designs they are distinct, even if they're lifting.
They're very 90s.
Yeah, even if they're lifting a ton of elements from other stuff. And we were talking about like Psylocke and stuff. Both Voodoo, Zealot, and Void. Jim Lee has at this era has a very specific way that he draws women, and their legs are long as shit, and they're not like anorexic. It's not like a Michael Turner thing, but they're
very weird when you get into the waist thigh region.
Yeah, they're very thin, but like it doesn't make your like head break, but it's just really weird proportions, and the legs are insane, especially whenever one of them's next to like Marlowe, who's a dwarf.
Well, the funniest thing, like I said, the funniest part is when he draws Marlowe. It literally looks like Jim Lee drew like a standard guy with broad shoulders, and then was like, oh, he's a dwarf, and then he just like shoddily like erased the legs and drew like little stubs, and the proportions are comical.
Yeah. So the basic plot is Lord Emp and Lord Emp and Void. They have Spartan.
They have Spartan, Warblade, and Maul
working for them, and they go to find. And then separately, we see Grifter and Zealot go to find Voodoo, and then they all cross paths and team up. And the purpose is to stop this guy named Hellspawn from...
Which he has a pretty cool design.
Yeah, he has a cool design.
He's like he kind of looks like evil Ghost Rider with a cape.
Yeah, he looks like a Ghost Rider thing, or something you might expect in Spawn.
Yeah.
So they need to stop this guy Hellspawn from getting this orb, which the orb, if he gets it, will allow him to open a dimensional portal that will allow an alien race that he's from to invade the Earth. And this is where we get into the insane backstory of the Wildstorm universe, which is so weird. So
you have 3 minutes.
All right. So in the Wildstorm universe, there's basically like these two alien races that have been at war forever, and they evolved separately and colonized other planets and stuff, and then they came across each other, and then there was a huge war. And then some of them ended up stranded on Earth, and there are descendants of them. So there's the Daemonites, which are like reptilian parasite things, which can attach to host bodies from different races, including humans. And then there's the Cherubim, or these pronunciations may be wrong, which are like these noble warrior ones. And so they were at war forever. And then there's this group called the Cabal, which is like... I guess mostly Daemonites on Earth that are trying to further the Daemonite stuff. Yeah. And it's kind of weird because like then all of these characters are like blood related to this ancient war. And as the Wildstorm universe expanded, there were tons of like miniseries like Team 7 and Team 1, which went into the backstory.
Didn't Team 7 have a New 52 book?
Yeah, but all the Wildstorm stuff in the New 52 is like it's drastically
Stormwatch
changed.
had a book.
Yeah. So Hellspawn is one of these Daemonites, and he's like not attached to a human, like his host is non-human.
His host is non-human because Voodoo tries to use her powers later on. She's like, it only works on a human host.
But like at least here they don't fully explain like what he's attached to and like why that's significant and why should we care.
Well, this book doesn't explain anything.
Yeah. And like this book kind of like implies that the Coda are like somehow linked to this, like the female assassin thing, but it's not clear whether they're linked to the Cherubim.
They're linked only there because we have to have a reason for Grifter and what's her face? Zealot to join the story because they're tracking down people in the Coda. And like what happens is they intersect with the WildCATs and then they meet up and then they join forces.
Yeah. There's a bunch of shady government agents here.
Former Vice President Dan Quayle makes an appearance.
Yeah. So Dan Quayle ends up possessed by one of these Daemonites, and he's the mole for the Cabal in order for them to like have this like government facility and get the orb.
You saw me when I pointed out when they actually said it was Dan Quayle. You actually saw me put the book down and just like take that in for a second.
But the funny thing here is there's like Jim Lee is actually or Brandon Choi is actually trying to be funny for a moment. I don't know if you caught this, but I believe Maul calls Dan Quayle at some point Potato Head.
Yes.
And if you remember, Dan Quayle was infamous for like getting into argument at like an elementary school appearance or something about how to spell the word potato.
Yes, Dan Quayle has many gaffes in his political career. My favorite being him saying it's wonderful being here in the great state of Chicago.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
But as far as like other like weird 90s stuff, at some point Grifter says yippee-ki-yay. I don't know if you caught that.
I think I caught that. It's very, you can see it's very 90s, and like they're pulling from a lot of stuff. Yeah. Also, there's another Deadpool in this book, Pike.
Yeah, so let's get to
the bad guys.
Hellspawn has these two major minions. One of them is another Coda. I don't think she's specifically named.
No, I don't think any of the Codas are specifically named. They're just a Coda.
And then Pike, who's like a Deathstroke Deadpool ripoff.
He's literally Deadpool.
Yeah, he's like a red and black color scheme. He looks exactly
He's red and black, has a bunch of pouches and two samurai swords on his back, and it's almost the exact same eye design on the mask. It's Deadpool.
Did you like the like when Warblade did this extended sports metaphor?
It was so left field and weird.
It was. He says it was like now we're in sudden death overtime.
Yeah.
Go, and then he yells touchdown, and then he says, "I'll rip your heart out for the extra
point." It's
pretty hilarious.
That's what at the time of recording this, that's what the Patriots are going to do to the Steelers this week, because that's what's going to happen.
Then you got to upload this in time.
It should be uploaded soon.
And then there's this character. This is another weird plot point because they don't like fully go into this. There's this character named Gnome, who they do lead up to because like Gnome is who gives the Wildcats the information on where to find Voodoo. But then he pops up later in the third act and just steals the orb out from under Hellspawn's nose, and then like 3 seconds later gets shot and like thrown off a cliff by by Marlowe, I believe. And I'm not totally sure, but I don't think Gnome really showed up again. I mean, obviously he falls and like presumably dies here, but like
everyone presumably dies.
Yeah, but they didn't.
But they all get away.
They didn't really build Gnome up much, and then Gnome also has his like 3 minions, and one of them has a cool design where it's kind of like a mix between Warlock and Clayface or something.
Which guy is this?
It's this guy. I don't know if there's a better pair.
Oh yeah,
his name's like Slag.
He's the guy that takes control of Dan Quayle.
Yeah, but then his other 2 guys are just like boring like guys with mech suits.
Okay, I think the whole big deal about the Coda that's with Hellspawn is that it's the first Coda. If that makes it any more impactful, because in the sketchbook in the back, it's the first Coda.
Okay, yeah, that's one of Hellspawn's minions.
So I think it might be that's the reason why she matters more than the other one that Grifter and Zealot hunt down.
Okay, yeah.
But that's just me like trying to grasp at straws here.
So like honestly, like there's not a shitload to talk about the plot. It's more like analyzing like the characters and stuff like that.
It's very like the Justice League movie. It's very bare bones and forgettable.
Yeah, because like Lee and Choi are like very loosely setting up like this insane deep backstory for the Wildstorm universe here.
Yeah.
And like you can see where these characters might move forward as far as the Wildcats and things like that, but like the actual plot here, and also even like the whole like Damonite Kirugan War thing, that like kind of got put on the back burner for several years.
Did you say the second issue to this was like 3 months late?
Yeah, well I'll get into that in a second, but like the major like when they majorly return back to like that whole like war and backstory stuff within the actual Wildcats book, that's not until Alan Moore comes around, which is like several years later.
I like to imagine Jim Lee giving Alan Moore a stack of Wildcats books and be like, hey, read these and catch up.
Well, the joke is that So Alan Moore was writing a few image things in the late 90s, and the joke is when Rob Liefeld came to him for Supreme, and Supreme is like Liefeld's weird Superman ripoff. Like Moore just was like, I really don't care at all what the heck you were making, and then Moore made had like a short run on Supreme, which was like this like great like deconstruction of the Superman analog. But so the second issue, first of all, and there's a little teaser of it in the trade, but the second issue has a great foil cover, one of the classic foil covers of the 90s. It's like this blue.
Are there any classic foil covers in the 90s?
Yeah. I mean, visually. And so in the introduction to the second issue, Jim Lee says, I know it's 4 to 5 weeks later, endemic for much of the Image line, because almost all the Image books, though I don't think Savage Dragon and Spawn, I think were very consistent. And part of that,
Spawn was consistent at the beginning.
Yeah, well no, I think Spawn's come out almost every month.
Well, they kind of show it. That's kind of freaky.
And then they have the text list. But but part of that was that Spawn and Savage Dragon to a sort of lesser extent, but McFarlane's promise was that he wasn't going to do any spin-offs from Spawn for like the first like 2 years or something like that. And I think he stuck to it. Was that true? Yeah, I think he stuck to it. But like WildCATs, and I'll get into this later, like WildCATs started spinning out like crazy.
Well, in the second issue, Youngblood shows up.
Yeah. And so, the second issue was 4 to 5 weeks later. Also, this was originally supposed to be a 3-issue miniseries. The reason the second issue was late, allegedly, was, well, not allegedly, Jim Lee had his firstborn child born at that point. And so, understandably, that put things back. But you also think when you're launching this big new publisher, you might want to bank some issues and stuff like that.
That's my favorite thing. These guys break away from they have the notoriety enough to break away from the big two and make their own business, and then almost immediately things go off the rails.
Yeah, well, the problem was none of these guys were really businessmen or like managers.
Well, the only one that was proven to be a businessman is Todd.
Yeah, I mean, and also he developed that. They weren't comics businessmen necessarily.
But it's because Todd had his other interests in action figures and baseball.
Yeah. And so I think you'll see like in the credits, like they have like an editor-in-chief or like quote unquote and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. Like who is like normally Marvel or DC or any other place, you have an editor that's like, this needs to be done.
Yeah.
Who is policing these guys?
Well, that's the problem is that, I mean, it was Image, but you technically they were partners. So it was like 5 separate studios. And so in the beginning here, actually, I'm slightly confused on the timeline of this, but I don't think it was technically Wildstorm quite yet.
This is still 92, right? So
yeah.
This still would have been Image.
It is Image, but I'm saying Wildstorm was one of the studios of Image and then got separately bought out by DC. But At this time, Jim Lee was calling his studio Homage Studios. And I think he shared it maybe with Portaccio.
I think, yeah.
And so, there was lots of late stuff. Interestingly, also in the intro to the second issue, Jim Lee announces that they've recruited Sam Keith, and he's going to start the Max series soon.
Hey, maybe that could be a podcast for the future. You did give me those 2 trades.
Yeah. And so also he mentions in the intro to the second issue that partly due to lateness, there's recycled art in the second issue from the first.
Oh yeah.
And I was curious because I haven't read from the trade in a while. I was reading the single issues. They did not fix that in the trade. They do layout stuff to try and disguise it, but it's literally recycled panels for like almost 2 entire pages. And so, we were saying, so Rob Liefeld's Youngblood shows up.
Yeah, and it just so by happenstance, I opened to the page where Youngblood shows up.
And so the hilarious thing is that Liefeld was coming from X-Force, so another X-Men kind of book, and you can see like not just the parallels between both of these teams and X-Men, but both of these teams have like near identical members.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
So Youngblood, their leader is named Shaft. And he has a very similar design, same hair color to Spartan. And
same mask design.
Yeah, and character-wise, he's basically like Cyclops, and he has like a Hawkeye gimmick as well. And then I think this guy's name is like...
That's Deadpool.
No, it's... Well, yeah. So Liefeld's Deadpool remake is called Die Hard, which is hilarious.
Stop.
Yeah.
You're joking.
Yeah, and so
No.
Die Hard looks exactly like Deadpool and also like Pike from WildCATs. And then...
I know Chapel because of times he showed up in Spawn when I was watching Geek Evolution Spawn here.
Yeah, so Chapel's a black guy with a gun, and it's not face paint. That is actually
that's a skull.
That's a skull grafted onto his skin. And then I think her name is like Vogue or something like that, and she's just like their
There's
female.
this guy who looks like Wolverine and Sabretooth mixed together.
Yeah, but he's got those 90s cable shoulder pad designs.
Yeah, and then there's Bedrock, who looks like who looks almost exactly like Puck. I'm sorry, not Puck. Maul, because he's gray instead of purple, and he also reminds me of Concrete for some reason. Probably because of the gray face, and it's more circular.
Yeah, and the Thing and all kinds of stuff like that. So interesting, you say Bedrock. His name is not Bedrock; it's Badrock. But he's referred to as Bedrock here because the lawsuit didn't happen yet. The people who own what is the show? The Flintstones.
The Flintstones.
The Flintstones live in Bedrock, and whoever owned the rights to the Flintstones sued Rob Liefeld, and they changed his name to Badrock.
It's almost like do you know the character in Spawn Overkill?
Yeah.
It's because they could not get the rights to the words Overkill, so the character's name had to be called Overtkill.
Yeah. And so
stupid.
There's also a point in the book where Chapel, he's like talking to Dan Quayle, and he says, "I'm no Republican, but like it doesn't work at all because Dan Quayle was a Democrat, but like he's defending him. It just doesn't make sense. The second issue
he was Clinton's VP, right? Yeah, that makes no sense.
The second issue, the single issue, had a preview for Wetworks, which was Will Portacio's title. And then later in like the...
Can I ask why almost all of these books had like this weird, strange, like espionage government strike force team vibe? Was that all the rage in the 90s, I guess?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're building off of X-Force and things like that where you have these like government...
Well, the only government mandated team for the X-Men was X Factor.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not necessarily like government.
And that was the second iteration of X Factor.
Yeah, it's more like the espionage thing. I don't know. I guess people were into conspiracies and stuff like that.
Wow, we're looking on just a picture. That's just Deadpool's eyes.
So the second issue had a preview for Wetworks, which was canon to the Wildstorm universe. But then in the fourth issue, Jim Lee explains, and again, this is understandable and unfortunate. Portacio's, I think his sister or his sister-in-law, I believe, had passed away from lupus, I believe.
Oh God!
And so he actually that's why Portaccio, I don't think he ever actually had a full studio within Image because very shortly after they made the company, that happened, and so Wetworks was indefinitely delayed, and then eventually that came out. And so yeah, this was originally meant to be a 3-issue miniseries. The third one was going to be double-sized and packed with a trading card, but because of the delays on Jim Lee's side, and also there were delays with the production of the cards, they expanded it to 4 standard issues, just to avoid getting a really bad reputation with the delays. And the fourth one, as originally released, did have a card by Topps. And I don't think anyone cares about those cards anymore. That's another relic of the 90s.
Somehow I came into possession, we talk about the old 90s comic book trading cards. I might have to bring them over here sometime. Did I tell you that, I got them from my brother? I just have, this full binder of a set of 90s Marvel trading cards.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with them other than, they're sitting in a closet somewhere just taking up space. But, they're kind of cool, though.
Yeah. There were the designs on a lot of them were cool, and Jim Lee did a lot of the ones for Marvel.
Yeah.
And
aren't they using some of the unused card designs?
They're not even unused. They're not even unused. They're just recycling the designs for variant covers.
Oh wow! I initially read that they were unused designs.
No, it's just.
Wow, that's just shameless.
Yeah, I mean it's just.
I mean, they own the art.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jim Lee is getting paid somehow for them. I mean, not bucket loads, but it's just weird 90s nostalgia variant cover things which are creeping back into the industry.
It never happened, but it's nice to see Jim Lee come back to maybe just do a miniseries or something for X-Men. But he's kind of tied with a busy job at being co-publisher of DC Comics.
Yeah. And so the Zero issue, real quickly, I said it went into Void's backstory as a Russian astronaut. It shines a little bit more light on Gnome and his backstory and what the orb is about. Also, there are a few awkward things worth pointing out. Jake Marlowe, he meets up with some woman, and this is leading into him meeting with Gnome. And after, the woman hands him a CD or something, and he says, "Now that we're done with business, can I offer you some pleasure?" or something like that, and he gets slapped. And that's definitely something that wouldn't be in a comic today. There's also in the Zero issue, Grifter makes a joke about the Cubs winning a World Series.
Hey, that happened though.
Yeah, so he says something. It's something it's like a hypothetical that would never happen, and he's like, as if, and then he's like, and the Cubs are gonna win the World Series.
Hey, it took over 100 years, but it happened.
Yeah, and so after this 4-issue quote unquote miniseries, which was supposed to be 3 issues, they just turned it into an ongoing. And the next arc was already, I mean, Youngblood is in this, but it's not technically a crossover with Youngblood, like the actual title. But the very next arc is another crossover with Mark Silvestri's Cyberforce.
Well, they mentioned Cyberforce at the beginning.
Yeah, they're mentioned here. That's the other thing is the explanation for Youngblood in this book is inconsistent because very early on they make it sound like they're mercenaries.
I thought that's what they were.
Well, that's the thing is at some point
even before I read that, I always thought they were just mercenaries for hire, but they were good guys.
That's the thing is I think they are mercenaries for hire, but then later on it acts like they're just a selfless team of heroes, like the Justice League or Avengers or something like that. So it's just inconsistent.
Dear Rob Liefeld, if you listen to this, can you please explain Youngblood?
There's a new ongoing.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah, they rebooted it. It's on the 3rd issue or something.
Where, an Image?
Yeah.
Oh my! Is Liefeld drawing or writing it?
No, I don't think he has any.
Then why do I care?
Alan Moore also did some Youngblood stuff.
Did they Did they kidnap him? What did they do to him?
He did a crossover called Judgment Day, which was supposed to basically destroy the entire Extreme Studios thing and then reboot it all. But the crossover just never finished. And so I was talking about how WildCats had tons of delays, and then they just dug their own hole by also spinning off. Shortly following this arc, obviously you had this paperback collection, which is cool for the time. And
how quickly after the first 4 issues did this come out?
I'm not sure, but if you go to wikis, I believe the 0 issue is placed directly after 4. So I think they put out this trade and then went into 5. But probably also between those, there was a WildCATs special, which was written by Steve Gerber and drawn by Travis Charest, who would be go on to be a really big part of Wildstorm. And then there was a miniseries called WildCATs Trilogy, which was the 3-part miniseries that this book ended up not being, and that was by Choi and Jay Lee. And then this first volume...
I guess we'll get into this later. I guess we can kind of delve into WildCATs a little bit because I know WildCATs 3.0 is a big thing. Is that by...
Yeah.
That's by Joe Casey, right?
Yeah. So then
Alan Moore had a big run on WildCATs.
Yeah. So volume 1, this is the beginning of, lasted 50 issues. And
oh, wow.
There was a run, there's an arc by Chris Claremont, and that was Chris Claremont and Jim Lee reuniting from X-Men.
I remember you showing me a few of those issues when we went on that comic book trip last year.
Yeah.
You found a couple of those.
Yeah, that collection, basically a lot of the WildCat stuff following this, and even this, because this is just really old.
We should have asked him about it when we were at IndieCon, though. Were those issues good?
What, the Chris Claremont thing?
Yeah.
I mean, not really.
Oh.
But a lot of these WildCATs collections are somewhat hard to find. And so there was an arc with Claremont reuniting with Jim Lee.
It's funny as they call this the WildCATs Compendium, and knowing what compendiums are today, like just referencing the Walking Dead compendium, this is nothing.
Yeah. Well, I think some of that was because this was intended as a miniseries. So I think this was still known as a miniseries when this came out.
Huh.
And then I might have this order wrong. I don't think so. But then there was a run by Alan Moore, and there was a run by James Robinson. And anything besides this, Claremont, Robinson, and Moore, most of it's not collected, and a lot of that I believe was still by by Brandon Choi. And then Volume 2 ran 28 issues, and it was started by Scott Lobdell and Travis Charest, but they both quickly left, and then Joe Casey finished it off with Sean Phillips, and then that goes into WildCats 3.0 / Volume 3, whatever you want to call it, and that was also Joe Casey with mostly Dustin Nguyen, known for Batman stuff.
I'm a big fan of his work.
Yeah. And so that was probably around that era. I can't tell you exactly when that was published, but kind of that WildCats 3.0 era.
Was it 2000s?
Yeah, it was like late 2000s. That was really when Wildstorm was kind of firing on all cylinders critically, where you had Ed Brubaker doing stuff like Sleeper.
I didn't even know Sleeper and that stuff was a Wildstorm.
Yeah. And then you had Joe Casey on WildCats. And then you have plenty of other critically acclaimed stuff like Warren Ellis. And this is a little bit earlier, but in the early to mid 2000s, you had Warren Ellis, Brian Hitch, Mark Millar, and Frank Quitely doing a lot of stuff on Stormwatch and Authority. But this early WildCats, kind of the very early Wildstorm stuff, is kind of lost to time for the most part. And really the only relevance is the Jim Lee art.
I mean, as far as the designs go, I think Grifter has a really cool design. I like Maul's design. Spartan's just kind of, it's meh.
Yeah, well,
when he's using his powers, it looks cool, but
yeah, I talked about the WildCats special, and I talked about the WildCats trilogy miniseries. Voodoo got her own miniseries. Zealot got her own miniseries. Grifter got multiple ongoing series. Warblade got a miniseries. Maul got a miniseries. Spartan, like literally every character on this team got a miniseries of some sort. Like so, I think Zealot was written by Kurt Busiek.
What in the world?
Yeah, eventually Voodoo was written by Alan Moore, but also that miniseries has like no connection to even his own Wildcat stuff.
So, would you, I guess, kind of summarizing the story, they end up beating Hellspawn and...
Well, that's the thing, is they beat Hellspawn, but then Gnome comes out of nowhere and like just...
They double crosses him. And
just like, throws a wrench in everything, but then they very quickly resolve Gnome as well.
Yeah. And
then what we end with is...
The Wildcats kind of...
The Wildcats are...
They're back on the ship.
Well, they're presumed dead, really. And Youngblood is kind of there to clean up the mess and then walk away as well, since this is not their comic.
Well, the book leaves with like a kid in an Image Comics t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of cool.
Extra, read all about it. Dan Quayle, an alien.
Also, extra spelled without an E, which doesn't make any sense, because like, it's not like, that's not an
It was the 90s,
thing.
Vince.
Yeah, but like, there's no phonetic difference.
No, there isn't.
Maybe
they had to pay for the letters. They just couldn't afford it that month.
Yeah. And so Spartan, also during the battle, Spartan dies during the climax.
Oh, I know who that is now. Okay, that's like that weird general from the beginning. Because he's missing his eye.
And so Spartan dies during the battle. And
he's fine.
And then like Voodoo is like upset about it, and then Marlowe very quickly is like, oh yeah, we can instantly put him back in a new body. Also,
yeah, we're downloading his memories right now. He's fine.
Yeah.
So that takes any dramatic tension out of that.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean,
it's
at the very least, like, there's tons of Jim Lee stuff to just look at, even if it's not peak form.
I mean, I'd say we talked about that. There's Wildcats by Alan Moore, and then there's Wildcats 3.0. I'd be much more interested in reading those than continuing with this. The Wildcats, I mean, they got decently popular because they did have a cartoon on ABC.
Yeah. Yeah, they had a TV show. I don't think it ran very long. But
The only other Image property Savage Dragon also got a TV show, and so did Spawn on HBO. But like Youngblood and Cyberforce didn't get shows.
Yeah. When it initially launched in 1992 at the beginning of Image, I'm sure this first issue was probably top of the charts. If it didn't launch the same month, like the infamous thing is that the best-selling comic book of all time, single issue in American markets, is X-Men Volume 2, Number 1, and that was Jim Lee. And then right before that, the previous record holder was X-Force Number 1 by Liefeld. And
sitting in my room right now.
Yeah, and then it didn't reach the X-Men Volume 2 Number 1 record, but Youngblood was very close. Well, it sold a shitload of copies. And then obviously this is early 90s, so this is definitely speculator boom.
What's really weird is that like as a kid and like just kind of shorthand knowledge, when I think of the Image characters, I don't think of WildCats because I think of like out of like scattered books like somehow I'd buy from Ollie's and you get a bunch of crap, or like stuff that my brothers would give me because they didn't want. Excuse me there. We'll edit that out. Like stuff like that was handed to me, where I'd get in like all these packages. I'd get like Brigade and like Youngblood, Cyberforce, like. Then there's some Valiant stuff, but like much more. It's just very weird for me to think of the WildCats because I like kind of knew who they were, but at the same time, I think Youngblood and like Cyberforce might be, and of course Spawn is Savage Dragon is more well known, but WildCats is the one that got the TV show for Cyberforce and Youngblood.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think some of that. I mean, at least compared to Spawn and Savage Dragon, some of that is just that it's a team book. But I think within Image, Grifter's fairly iconic.
Oh yeah, I mean that, like I said, like the mask functionally it makes no sense, but man, is it a cool design.
Yeah.
Like you can look at WildCats and like I remember you could hand someone a WildCats cover and then immediately I think everyone would go, who's the coolest? Oh, Grifter.
Yeah. And so just to clarify some of the like publication stuff. Just real quickly. So this launched in 1992. There were shitloads of delays and stuff, but the WildCats pretty much more or less ran continuously through 2004. The end of 2004, that's when 3.0 ends. And then that's about when things kind of started going to shit, partially because Volume 4 in 2006 was the infamous Grant Morrison and Jim Lee.
That lasted 2 issues.
It lasted 1. The second issue never came out, but the script came out. I think because they tried to relaunch like 2 of the books at the same time. I think the other was Authority, and that one I think went out 2 issues. And so you had this highly like pumped up relaunch for multiple Wildstorm books, and this is at the point also we should mention DC Comics bought Wildstorm in 1999, I believe. So by this point,
I didn't know they bought him that early.
Yeah, and it just existed as a totally separate imprint forever. And so there was just a bunch of failed relaunches, and then the Wildstorm universe, like they were kind of working towards more crossovers with the DCU and possibly incorporating it, and then of course the Flashpoint reboot just threw a wrench in all that, and they were incorporated, and then quickly all those books died off. And now we're at the point where we're at another reboot where Warren Ellis, who's probably the biggest writing name in Wildstorm history, is rebooting it all in a like 2-year-long book called The Wildstorm.
Which I've heard mixed things about.
Yeah, and they're slowly making spinoffs for
that. Didn't Wildstorm's getting is it getting a 25 years hardcover?
Yeah.
This soon, right? Or is it out yet?
I think it might be out. It's one of those like a celebration of things.
Yeah, it's like the Aquaman, the Batman, Superman.
Yeah.
Almost every character's got one. Like Two-Face is getting one?
Yeah,
it's really weird.
Their selection on some of them is odd. But like have you seen those Batman Arkham trades where it's like spotlights on each villain?
Yeah.
Harley's daughter, Duella Dent, or no, Joker's daughter, Duella Dent, got one of those trades before Mad Hatter.
That's funny because I can't think of enough Joker's daughter stories to fill one of those trades.
Yeah. Well, it's even weird because Joker's daughter's two characters, because in the New 52, they made her like an actual Joker-related thing, whereas originally she was just she was a really obscure Teen Titans thing.
Oh, I didn't even know she was a Teen Titans thing. I only know the New 52 one.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. And they are doing like all kinds of reprints and stuff like that.
So, do you know what the contents of that Wildstorm 25th anniversary book is?
I mean, not really. It'll just be.
If you're I guess I should say, if you're interested in early Wildstorm, I'm guessing, would it be worth picking up?
Not really. I think all of those books, especially if it's not like a solo character like Superman or Batman, they're just
because sometimes there's something that's not been published. It's kind of hiding in there.
Yeah, I mean they're mostly random spatterings, so you're getting one-off issues, like a dozen of them.
Because I know, like, for example, I could be wrong. You're probably about to correct me. The Captain Marvel one for DC, probably worth having because they have just hardly published any of the old Captain Marvel stuff.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is the situation. There's probably some stuff in that Wildstorm thing which has not previously been reprinted, but like it's probably like the first issue of this trade we're talking about now.
Like, I'm wondering if it would be good as a sampler if you want to check out that stuff.
It's a sampler, but again, it's Wildstorm. It's the entire universe. So you probably get the first issue of this. You probably get that Morrison and Lee issue. Probably get an issue of Sleeper. Probably get an issue of WildCATs 3.0. Get some Authority and
Gen
Stormwatch.
13?
Yeah, some Gen 13. I want to, if you just want like an overall real quick sampler of the whole Wildstorm universe, you can try that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would track down like one of the Wildcats by Robinson or Alan Moore or the 3.0 stuff, which again, sadly, some of that stuff's hard to find. I
mean, the best thing, like I said, I got this trade for a bucket Nittany-Con, so that was kind of a nice grab there.
Yeah.
I guess search some back issues if you're really, really curious.
Yeah. I don't know. DC, they kind of dropped the ball with the integration in the 2010s. There were some weird, interesting crossovers in the 2000s where right before the pre-Infinite Crisis teams got on the Superman books, so that would be Greg Rucka on Adventures of Superman, Azzarello and Lee on Superman, and I'm not sure who was. I think Action was Chuck Austin and Ivan Reis. But right before those teams got on, you had two really weird arcs. You had the Godfall story, which is the weird one where he's like on Krypton and it's like a dream or something. And then right after that, you had the Strange New Visitor story, where briefly, and written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, you had Mr. Majestic popping into the DCU for a minute, and he was Wildstorm's Superman analog. And then later you had a story where Captain Atom showed up in the Wildstorm universe, and that was called Captain Atom Armageddon. And that was pretty interesting because they did this interesting parallel where like they were comparing Captain Atom as a cipher for the ideals of the DC Universe heroes to Wildstorm, which at this point, like one of the major Wildstorm universe crossovers is called Coup d'etat, where the Authority finally just dismantled the United States government and basically take over the world. And so especially as it went on, the Wildstorm universe just got insane and very conspiracy theory-like and like fascistic and crazy.
I guess closing thoughts on the Wildcats. I mean, this kind of was just almost a meme podcast just because you have that one glorious moment of you talking about the Wildcats for 30 minutes and us leaving the room.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this trade, it's not great. It's Jim Lee art. The plot doesn't make any sense. None of the characters have really developed like arcs or characterization.
It's a stretch to even call some of them characters.
Yeah. You come in here for design work. There's a bunch of double page splashes or page splashes.
I'll say this. I had read one thing with the Wildcats prior to this, and that was JLA Wildcats by Morrison.
Yeah.
I liked that more than this.
Yeah. I mean, even like the storytelling, like a lot of people criticize Jim Lee for storytelling abilities, and I agree with them on that. He's not the greatest storyteller, and so like the plotting is bad. But like again, Mike got it for like $1, and you'll see even like the polybag stuff with with the Zero issue, you might see that in like hiding in the back of a store, like with the plastic wrap all dusty and stuff like that. Like I'm pretty sure that's
smells
how
like old smoke and.
Yeah, I think Comic Swap, which is the store where we are, I think they had a copy like a long time ago, and I passed on it, and then ended up getting mine online or something like that. If you really like Jim Lee, you should definitely check it out.
The art's not bad, but I much prefer X-Men and Batman, Superman stuff over this.
Yeah.
I think it just kind of chalks up to, I think just because some of the issues might have been rushed because of deadlines, it doesn't look as crisp as a Jim Lee comic that I'm used to seeing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the core, I mean, I've said this like 5 times, but it's worth possibly picking up just to look at the Jim Lee art. And then I think the Wildstorm universe, especially in these early stages, there are a lot of interesting ideas. Like there's this whole crazy backstory.
Yeah, I applaud them for trying to make this huge universe, huge universe with this expanded backstory. But I just think it's in 4 issues, it's too much to try to set up too fast.
Yeah, it's just not executed at all. But if you're interested, I mean, like I'm always interested in like checking out some of these like comic shared universes that no longer exist. And Wildstorm is a decent one for that. And there's a few blogs. You can just do with a quick Google search, and some people have set out like reading orders of like how to get a good grasp of a lot of this backstory and get like a fuller look at the Wildstorm universe.
Just looking at the back, we can read about Jim Lee. He lives the good life in San Diego with his wife Angie and his baby girl Tyler. But as a founder of Homage Studios, he can often be found at the drawing table creating and illustrated new heroes for the next generation of fans. Not really doing that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, he was...
And he's had a lot more kids since then.
Yeah. But it's an interesting story. The story of the story, not the story itself.
Yeah.
But I think, do you have any other closing thoughts?
Art was good. Some of the characters look cool. Like, I don't hate these characters. I'm not like actively like, like I said, there's enough interest here and enough because I like Joe Casey, so there's enough interest from these characters because I think like aesthetically they look cool and interesting that I would definitely be down to read WildCATs 3.0 or the Alan Moore stuff. And yeah, because I'm a huge Grant Morrison fan, I'd probably read that 1 issue he wrote. Yeah. But overall, just like I said, continuing this volume of WildCATs, not really any interest.
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Not really.
Not really? Well, thanks for joining us for this hour-long in-depth look at Jim Lee's WildCATs. Thanks for listening, and usually if this gets up at the right time, have a happy holiday.
Peace.
We're heroes, not zeros. We got what they fear, so here's the fact. So we got power to the max, you know what tough as nails. When all else fails, call Nerves of steel. Here's the deal. You better watch out.